Ever have a magic unicorn? Probably not. Well, let's talk about modern embryonic sciences for a minute. We were able to apparently unlock genetic sequencing way back in the 90s. And since then, we've been learning about different proteins and enzymes that, when introduced at different points in a creature's development, you can actually genetically get it to do things. Now, some of the original tests, let's start off with the bioluminescence. We've seen this in a lot of birds, right? No, we haven't. But there are some birds that have bioluminescence. It's more commonly associated with sea creatures and, of course, the lightning bug. Um, and there are some plants with an amount of bioluminescence. This means they make their own light. Light, in many cases, that you can visually see. We've also got a lot of bacteria in the ocean that are bioluminescent. A lot of ships will leave a green or blue wake, sometimes purple. And it's really cool to watch, when you see it on film. Give me a moment, I'm going to sneeze. The blue one isn't a bacteria, it's an algae, I believe. I'm going to sneeze again. I've been looking at some of the studies of embryonic science, and the first studies, they tried to see if they could modify a piece of skin, and they tested out a few different pieces of skin. One of them was hollow hair that grew off of it. And what kind of animals have hollow hair? Well, the polar bears' hairs are hollow. They're also very white. There's also the mice that they tested it out in, just to see if they could get the mice and such to be bioluminescent. And yes, they were. Now, that wasn't until the early 2000s. Then, by like 2008, they'd actually been able to mess with the genetic sequencing enough with mice so they could get mice to basically be bioluminescent. Imagine that. You got all the lights off in the house, and you're sleeping, and a flash goes across the room. Brightens up the whole room. Mouse comes out of its hole. That's not all we've been able to do, though. We've also been able to mess with the structures of different animals like chickens. They tested, this is over on the east coast of the United States. Two scientists were checking on, basically, they took different enzymes or inhibitors and put them in tiny beads, or shaped them into tiny beads, and they put them into the embryo in different spots to inhibit certain things. And they discovered that they were able to actually make a chicken with, a snout like if it was like a microraptor or an Archaeopteryx. So there's a lot of different genetic stuff that they're testing out how to stop certain parts of the genetic sequencing. They can also make one particular bone that used to be in dinosaurs, that now it doesn't extend as far in birds. Birds still have it. It just doesn't extend all the way down to the foot. Or all the way down to the ankle, I mean. One of the other genetic things that they've done is they've been able to get basically horns to grow in the center, kind of like a cassowary, or I'm not sure what else. But basically, all of our DNA, not all of it's used. Some of it's genetic markers. And they say there's so much genetic information in our DNA that the very gene that makes a narwhal so that it's got that big long thing coming off of its nose, you probably have that in your genetic makeup. It's just a matter of it being activated at a certain time during your gestation period. This is before you're born. So now they're able to manipulate, even in mammals, the gene that gives you different colors. They can even choose the color of the glow-in-the-dark mouse. Also, bioluminescence works better in chickens, apparently. It's easier to unlock it in a lot of aviaries than it is to unlock it from something like, say, a crocodile or something like a mammal. Our hair kind of actually inhibits the ability to see bioluminescence because a lot of times that's a skin thing. That's why if you've got something with hollow hairs that are white, like a polar bear hair, it comes out a lot more. You can see it a lot more. If you have something with dark fur on it, and most mammals have fur, that's kind of one of the defining things about being a mammal. Some chickens actually do have teeth, or they have remnants of teeth. They got 2 rows, 1 row on each side of their mouth. And some of them are born with those being prominent and hardening. But most chickens are born without it at all. I was looking at some of the studies they had and some of the embryos they were checking out probably about 10 years ago. And a lot of the stuff that they'd been able to do by then with chicken embryos, which they weren't hatching any of them, they were just bringing them mostly to term and then freezing them. So basically they're adapting a life to be genetically different, but they're not hatching it. They're instead killing it instead of giving it a chance at life. And there's a lot of people who are angry about that, but we also think of the ecological destruction that could be created by such a thing. If you got a chicken with teeth running around eating all the little grub worms that the rest of the birds really rely on, you could get rid of a lot of native bird species just by having an invasive species that you've created. Now, where does this come down to a glow-in-the-dark unicorn? Well, we've been able to take the sequencing down to an art in some areas. Like when to introduce certain genes to make sure that it doesn't grow hair. So we can make any mammal naked, no hair whatsoever, doesn't grow hair anywhere, not even eyelashes, no hair. Problem is, eyelashes are protective, very protective, and you might not realize it. So, if you're able to make something with bioluminescent skin, but not necessarily bioluminescent hair, however, you're able to take white chickens and you're able to introduce bioluminescence into their genes, and their feathers themselves will be bioluminescent, or at least appear to be, because they're basically reflecting and refracting off of each other the entire time because of the shape of the feather. And even on a very small level, like the whole thing is a big refractory fan, and since you've got several of them stacked against each other, it does help to refract the light. But If it's bioluminescence that's coming from the skin in specific, well, then that skin is what's producing the light, not the feathers, not the hairs. As far as having a unicorn, if you were to have a unicorn, this is just to explain to you how inhumane it would be. You've got a unicorn. At night, it's going to attract bugs because it's glow in the dark, right? You've introduced the bioluminescence into the gene, and before you can introduce the bioluminescence into the gene, the first thing you have to do is make sure that at the point in time where that thing is going to grow hair, that it doesn't. Now, whether or not they'll be able to figure out how to sequence it so they can keep the mane and get rid of the rest of the hair, I don't know. But the mane would obviously not help to make it more luminescent. It would inhibit it, unless it was white hair. Now, if you start imagining such a creature, you're also going to have to imagine that a lot of bugs are going to be attracted to that thing at night. There's also the fact that that hair is protective covering because mammals tend to have soft skin. We get animals with bristles that are on the mammalian, species list, such as elephants. Very thick hide, very tough hide. But a horse doesn't have that. Now, once you've unlocked that gene, and then of course you've messed around with the same gene pool that narwhals have, you might not get a horn that's as big as you want. It doesn't have a very good chance of being a bioluminescent horn. Maybe you'll be able to get an ivory horn of whatever to grow out of the top of its head. But if you're going to do it on the genetic level, which is what people are messing around with now, one thing that they have been able to do is make it so that an animal will have a crest or a horn in the middle of its head. On us, I believe there's 2 plates that meet right there. Well, this part's a full cap. This part right here is where there's the split, I believe. It's been a while since I studied where the bones fuse on human skulls. Now, if they're able to do this stuff in chickens, and they are testing some of this stuff out on mammals, like lemurs are one of the test animals that they were talking about. They've got some of the animals that basically they don't allow them to be born, is one of the things they were talking about. They don't actually allow them to be born except for like the mice experiments and some of the aviary experiments. But these are animals that never leave a lab. These are used just for scientific studies. And the stuff that they're doing with chickens now is because people are wanting to see. We want to see an Archaeopteryx, don't we? Or maybe something that's a close semblance. Possibly even a microraptor. And I know that name is scary because you think of raptors as hunters and killers and, vicious creatures. In real life, it's more likely that they hopped around and ate bugs. Maybe something as big as a mouse. These things were not taking down big prey. You're talking about something that looks like a crow. It literally is the size of a crow. It's got the refractory, at least that's what they're telling us about the microraptor, is that, when you see a crow, they have the black feathers, and then you see the raven, and they have the shiny feathers. Well, a microraptor would have had those shiny feathers, the ones that kind of sparkle as if they're different colors depending on which angle it's at. But of course, if it's overcast, You can't really see any of those colors. It just looks black. But there's a name for that type of feather. And there's a guy who's the curator or one of the main guys for the Museum of the Rockies. And he's been trying to do a lot of testing with chickens as well, trying to make them so that the tailbones that they naturally have, that most animals have, including humans, we do have those vertebrae. They're just super short and condensed and fused together into our hips. With a unicorn, you're talking about something that if you're starting that growth while it's still, not come out of the birth canal, and you're about to have this bright and sunshiny horse that's about to come out, and you might even be able to pick your color even, because they can pick the color on mice now. That's because, when they found out that they could change the color of birds that way, it was pretty cool. But they really wanted to know if they could do it with mice. We're mammals. We want to know what mammals are capable of in the modern world, don't we? What can we do with people? Can we have our children have bioluminescent identification marks? That's one of the things they were talking about. Like, just in case you lose your kid at night, you'll be able to identify your kid because of the bioluminescence. I'm like, well, what are the ramifications? We, being mostly covered in skin but not much protective hair, we cover ourselves with clothing to make up for it. Now, if you've got a horse that's born with no hair, it's got no protective covering, well, you're not going to be able to see how pretty and bioluminescent it is because you're going to need to keep it covered up. If it's got a horn that's already starting to sprout out while it's in the birth canal, that's probably not a healthy thing for the mother. Also, how brains develop. We're still unsure about when you change a cranial size in a cranial cavity, like the study those guys were doing over on the East Coast with either alligator or crocodile eggs, and also chicken eggs and a few other different types of animals. And they were checking to see how these different genetic inhibitors and things that would hopefully unlock and increase a particular gene, what they could in specific do with it, and in specific with the birds, how does it relate to the ancient birds? Now, some of these scientists have been accused of trying to recreate the dinosaurs. You can't. All you can do is make something today look like it or appear as it. When it comes to the cranial cavities and cranial capacities, because when you're changing the mouth with that gene inhibitor, it changes the entire head structure. And with the brain that's in there, is that brain case the same size and shape as if it was just a regular bird unmodified? Also, the shape of the brain inside of that brain case, is that important? Does the brain only grow to the size of the skull that it's in, or does it grow to the size that it's supposed to? Now, it looked to me as if the skull was a lot thicker in every area, every single area. Now, one of the things with that, they're making a bird skull with teeth and a mouth, like a not like a velociraptor. Well, yeah, like a velociraptor. But mind you, velociraptors were small. They were about the size of a turkey. Velociraptors are not. Let me show you. I do like dinosaurs. All right, good. I got the velociraptor close. This is apparently blue. a velociraptor from one of the Jurassic Park movies. This is not what velociraptors looked like. They definitely weren't that big. A velociraptor's head was about the size of my fist. My fist. I don't have the big fist, by the way. If you take genetic modifications the way that they're doing it in these studies, it's completely different than completely changing the genetic makeup. It's also different from activating that gene within that species. Now, we do have examples of diseases unlocking genes within some species, where a bacteria in the area brings out something in an animal genetically, and they start growing stuff that other animals throughout history have had, but this particular breed of animals, doesn't. Some of them, there's viral things that can basically bring out old genetic traits in an animal. So we're not talking about anything like that, where we're making it so that, let's say, every single horse that is born after this one, like let's say you take two unicorns and you put them together, they're going to have a horse. That's where our genetic modifications are now. We don't have it to the point quite yet where you can take two genetically modified mouse. Let's say you take a pink genetically modified mouse and a blue genetically modified mouse, and you put them both together, and their babies will be either pink or blue or a combination of the two, or maybe they'll come out purple. No, their babies will come out as mice. Yeah. It's because what we're doing as far as the making birds with beaks, making them mimic a velociraptor, or mimic an Archaeopteryx, or mimic a Microraptor. If we're changing the genetics, we're just changing one tiny part, and just in that one animal. So let's say your little girl wants a unicorn, right? She wants a magical unicorn. Well, they're not magic, it's science. But 2,000 years ago, our science would definitely look like magic in a lot of areas. When we're talking about genetically modifying anything, we're talking about messing with nature. And when we're talking about unlocking genes, as in, let's say, at the 11th day gestation of a chicken, you introduce those little tiny beads into it just at that particular point in time, then it'll make it so that the face doesn't form a beak, that it forms an actual, pre-bird face, like a Microraptor face or an Archaeopteryx face, which Archaeopteryx, I guess they're still saying, is the first bird, even though it didn't have a beak. We stopped saying the dinosaurs went extinct and started saying non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. We have examples during the same periods of time where two birds, a type of Archaeopteryx and a type of actual bird, were so similar that the only real difference was a bone in the shoulder joints. And on one of them, on the bird, it was going one way, and on the Archaeopteryx, it was going the other. And the other part was that one of them had a full head and the other one had a bird's head. So there's a big difference between unblocking a gene temporarily so the head forms the way you want it to, where you have a very small window of that gestation period, and that's when you have to have it done. Any modifications you're doing, you have to do on the embryonic level while it's still in the egg. Or you have to make certain modifications to it before you put it into a host mother in the case of a mammal. In some of these mammals, they're just injecting the genes. They're not injecting, like, for example, when they first started testing the animals with the bioluminescent stuff, they were just putting a little bit of bioluminescence from something else into it to see how the skin would react. When they were able to start testing on the genetic level, they started wanting to test to see how they could unlock that in pretty much everything. And it comes down to a specific protein sequence, and that specific protein sequence, even humans have. That's right, you could theoretically make yourself a bioluminescent human being. Now, you can already do that by getting tattoo ink that's bioluminescent, glow in the dark, which you have to stand out in the sun or stand under some lights before you go into the dark area, because it's not going to last long. It's also apparently very cancerous, so it's, well, might just be in California, who knows. Let's say, like with many rich people's toys, eventually it gets to the point where poor people might be able to afford them, or at least hand-me-downs of them. Well, not if you're messing with baby horses on the genetic level while they're still inside of their mother. We're talking about a lot of care. We're talking about a lot of making sure you do things at the right time and trying to unlock the specific gene, have it so that it actually activates exactly when you want it. And you have to do that with every single baby. If you take 2 unicorns that you theoretically had made that had no hair so that you could enhance the bioluminescence, you unlock the bioluminescence gene in them. You also unlock that, gene that will allow them to have either a crest or a horn. And you've unlocked the part like on a narwhal that'll make it basically twist. So, you've learned how to unlock this stuff. Even with all of that, if you take 2 of your sparkly unicorns and they breed with each other, their offspring is going to be a horse. Okay? You haven't made a unicorn. What you've done is really fucked with a horse. You have royally, genetically screwed up that horse, and you might potentially unlock other genes that you didn't intend to. I'm not talking about making giant squid monsters like in the movies. I'm talking about genetic abnormalities that you might not have thought about. Like when you've got an animal that's body is not created to filter out any of the bioluminescent waste, because it does produce waste, you are increasing that animal's chances of having, failure of any particular organ because of that. You don't know how that's gonna affect it until you've unlocked it. Now, if you change it genetically and you make it so that it stays unlocked, well, then, of course, you could have them so that they make these genetic sparkly unicorn things that you want. But we're not that far into genetics yet. And although theoretically we could, probably within a generation or two, be able to do something like that. If let's say your little girl wants a pony unicorn, right? And that's what you want to give her. And you are a rich billionaire and you can hire all of the greatest genetic scientists on the planet to come and mess with a horse or a set of horses so that you can have a bioluminescent horse for your daughter. And they do all this genetic stuff for a horse, and she gets the little sparkly unicorn that she wants. That would be about the most expensive thing. It'd probably cost about as much as a battleship or an aircraft carrier even. I mean, that would get really expensive. If you were to just want to make one for your daughter, we're still talking in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's before the thing's even born. You don't even know if it's going to live. You don't know what that's going to do to the creature itself. You don't know what it's going to do necessarily even to the mother. Now, there's more than one bioluminescence gene, and some of them are actually poisonous to us. So it's probably a good idea that you don't unlock that one. Now, it's really cool that they're able to narrow down specific protein sequences so they can tell us exactly which genetic modification we'll be getting out of it. That is pretty cool. But there's also, these scientists are saying there's a lot of them that they haven't unlocked because there's just too many. Our genetic sequence is just that long. And the same thing with a jellyfish. A jellyfish's genetic sequence is just as long. So we come to the morality of it, right? Now here's a way you might be able to get some of the girls that I grew up with interested in genetics. Explain to them they can get a unicorn. That we already have the technology to unlock at least the shiny part of the horse. Although we have not genetically unlocked specifically on horses making a horn in the middle. But that's probably not far away. There's probably somebody out there who really wants to do that. And a lot of y'all look at the Jurassic Park thing, and that's where a lot of boys got our interest, right? For me, like with most boys growing up, I did like dinosaurs. Absolutely. And some of the technologies that are coming out that are, you've got an equal chance of making a dinosaur looking thing as you do to make a unicorn looking thing. But it's not going to be a dinosaur. Its offspring won't be dinosaurs. The genetically defunct chickens that they made, they were saying that those chickens, that if they have babies, those babies wouldn't look like the parents. Like when you introduce the FFL or FFA gene, and then there's a W something gene, and the two of those genes are the ones that make it so that you have teeth and a face that's capable of holding teeth instead of just having a beak like a bird. So if you do that, when you do it on the embryonic level, you're just changing it by chemical. If you wanted their offspring to do the same thing, you would have to do the same thing chemically to those eggs. At the same point in gestation, every time. Now there's also other genetic unlocks that they're trying to make, like being able to make a tail, like a long tail. such as on Archaeopteryx. Some of those birds, the ancient birds, had between 16 and 23 tail vertebrae. That's a bunch of tail vertebrae. That's a really long tail. They're also saying now that a lot of the divots that were in the vertebrae of some of those real tiny ones, that those divots were probably mounting points for, what do you call that? It's a particular type of ligament. I just can't remember the name of it at the moment. That basically those tails, they were able to swing them back and forth, like, really quick. And that they were able to, almost like having a prehensile tail, but it's feathered, so it wasn't quite that prehensile. They're also saying that portions that were closer to the hips may have had tendons that stretched across, almost half of the vertebrae that were in the tail. And that means that they were able to use it like a whip. That's pretty interesting. Of course, with your feathers on there, you wouldn't want to mess your feathers up. Much like with the boys thinking it would be cool to have dinosaurs, have your own pet velociraptor, and have it trained not to bite you, right? But a lot of boys, they think about, the ones that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, they don't think so much about feathered dinosaurs. They think about Jurassic Park style of dinosaurs. It's all learning experience, right? Whether you're trying to make chickens that look like little tiny dinosaur birds, or you're trying to make a bioluminescent ostrich or battle llama or unicorn or whatever else it is that you happen to be trying to mess around with. You got to think about the effects on your environment. What are the ramifications if you allowed the thing to live and go out there and do its thing? Well, with the genetic modifications that we have now, it really would not hurt anything to allow them to live. Instead of that guy at the University of Montana freezing the embryos so that they die, after, you've got them in an egg. Let's say the egg for the type of bird that you're checking out takes 63 days to gestate completely, right? So in that 63 days of gestation, let's say at day 11 you activate one thing, and at day 40 you activate another. And you see, by the time you get closer to day 63, let's say day 58, you terminate, right? You want to make sure that it doesn't actually crack out of the egg, because then you've got moral quandaries going on there. A bunch of Christians that are telling you that you're doing a horrible thing by creating these abominations. And then you've got another group of Christians that tells you that it's horrible for you to murder them because they're lives and God allowed them to be lives, and you should allow them to live out their lives. When we're talking about the ecological scale of damage that something that guy in Montana or one of those two gentlemen over on the East Coast made, if they genetically modified a magpie, if it was able to get another magpie to breed with it, it would still have magpie babies. There would be no genetic difference between that animal and the animal that it was originally when it was first gestated and put in that egg. You've just altered it earlier in its life. Kind of like if you were to take somebody.
Incoming call. 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 Incoming.
That was annoying. Call from Warrenton, Oregon. I guess I have to see who that is calling. Also, I gotta go charge up my electronics, so we're down to 35% battery on this phone. I've been talking for a while. Anyway, genetically, yeah, I suppose it's possible to have yourself a unicorn-looking thing, but it's not gonna be a unicorn. Yes, more than theoretically, it is already possible to take a chicken and introduce certain chemicals during certain portions of its gestation and have it come out looking like something similar to an Archaeopteryx. You can give it a dinosaur-looking face already. They've already done CAT scans of the eggs. They did kill the embryos by freezing them, of course, but they've done CAT scans of the eggs so that they can CAT scan the skeletal structure and all that kind of stuff, and what genetic variants and differences there are, and what it is that unlocked it, and when they introduced it, and a lot of really, really strange stuff. But I was just watching another thing on that, and I was looking at it and I went, man, this is a lot more advanced than what was going on in the 90s. We're making leaps and bounds. And we're kind of able to take snippets of our DNA to some degree. There are genetic treatments for getting certain diseases out of your body once it's in there. And that's kind of the similar treatment to these embryo. Once the embryo is already developed, though, into a full bird, you're not going to be able to change those things. The major skeletal things, you're not going to be able to change them later in life. That genetic stuff has to be done at a particular point. But there's also genetic things that you can do later on in life, whenever it happens to be, as long as you've been able to process it down. Like there are some diseases that humans are able to get, certain types of cancers even, that they have genetic treatments for. Or if you have a high probability of getting this type of cancer, they've got treatments that will make it so that your body produces a particular enzyme that will make it so that genetic marker never actually shows up in your system, which is really cool stuff to know. And since we mess around more with people's genetics and learning about people's genetics, and also different things we can introduce to the body, such as bacteria. That's right. There are bacteria that we've introduced to human bodies to prevent certain genetic anomalies from occurring. So when you look at how much it's going to cost to give your daughter a... Well, it looks like there's an officer here. We'll have to see what's going on with that. I'm gonna go talk to the lady inside first, though. Doesn't look as if they're here for me. I should grab my other phone. We'll find out who called from Warrenton in a little bit, too. Let me see. Where is my phone? There it is. whoever they're here for, it ain't me. I'm gonna go talk to some folks I know, so I'm gonna end this here video. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper and your sister's keeper too, and no victim left behind.